If you are new here, nice to meet you. I'm glad you're here. If you have been here before, I'm so happy you're back. My name is EC, and I like to have respectful conversations about nuanced topics. All right, so today we're going to be talking about how cultural mores and norms shape artistic expression, as well as a bit of a exploration about how gender shapes expression as well because of socialization. This was actually a requested topic, and it was put in my Discord and fantastically was voted on as well. I'm excited you're here, and I hope that if you like what you see, you don't forget to subscribe. On Friday, I uploaded a video about socialization and gender norms for mask presenting people, as well as kind of an exploration of like where that all started, where the more rigid social norms that we've gotten really used to started, especially when it comes to the United States. Specifically, we were looking at how Puritanism and a misunderstanding of socialism, misunderstanding of Stoicism has led to a very frustrating issue when it comes to how boys and men perceive their ability to emote and whether or not it's okay for mask people to express emotions outside of like being angry or kind of presenting a more like stoic, controlled expression. I wanted to kind of expand on that conversation because that was also a requested topic, and we talked a lot about the very specific gendered norms of how men and boys are supposed to act, not necessarily like the right or wrong of that, but just that there are certain factors that, went into even how our country in the United States, at the very least, was shaped that affect social expectations and cultural mores all the way to today. So I wanted to expand and also look at how that affects femme presenting people, women, girls. More than that, also how that affects artistic expression. And we're in a really, really interesting space in the world where we now have AI, which is being used a lot to essentially mine the artistic expression of artists who have presented their work through social media and the internet to create or to compose, if we're going to be super, well, maybe not super, but more scientifically accurate in how you could express that, like artistic renditions of images, videos, creations, and see how that has affected, the artistic landscape right now. Again, tonight's topic is going to be about like essentially artistic expression and how it's shaped by cultural and gendered norms, and also how things like major political movements, scarcity, austerity, or economic growth really affect artistic expression. I kind of wanted to start off with how girls are socialized and how boys are socialized, and then we can work into how that affects artistic expression, especially with how our societies are generally structured in like a capitalistic world where the amount of money you have can really determine how much either you as an individual or on a grander scale, how a society can support art and expression and the kind of time and resources it takes to really make innovative pieces of art, or to even just respond to the society at large through artistic expression. And art is something that is it's so integral to how we exist as a species. It's something that, from our earliest understandings of like recorded humanity, the reason we know about how a lot of humans or our earlier ancestors lived is because of paintings and because of oral traditions of storytelling that were passed down for generations, which is a form of art. And art is, in my view, something that is maybe more far-reaching than visual art or sonic art. We have, writing poetry, of course, has been passed down for ages. Oral storytelling is a very important and integral form of cultural expression and also tradition and identity. And really, I think, foundational in what shapes our understandings of right and wrong as a society, as well as there's so many different forms of art. And the more that we have access to new kinds of technology, the more kinds of art we can make, which is, to me, exciting. But we're also in this very curious period of time where we have this new form of technology, artificial intelligence, that has definitely gotten a lot of pushback from the artistic community because of the fact that it keeps getting used to make artistic pieces. And a lot of that pushback isn't because I think people are wholly angry about the idea that there's a new technology that can be used in an artistic way. More so that it is instead being used to replace artists who have to put a lot of time and physical effort, mental effort, into creating the art that is being generally bought and sold in the type of market that we have, and that can make or break a lot of artists and their ability to make art, because art is also a form of well, it's a job too. It's very much a job. And in the societal structure we've got right now that operates under capitalism, if you can't make money from what you're investing your time in, that can lead to some very, very serious consequences for you as a person, because it can mean that you don't have the ability to gain access to food, shelter, or the, medications, whatever is needed to keep you thriving and healthy and well. Whereas artists who have to instead use their time that they could be using to make art, exploring their craft, improving on their skills, trying out new kinds of techniques and even technologies when it comes to art, even inventing new technologies. All of that, it can be replaced by a need to survive in the kind of market that we exist in, where your time and your skills are exchanged for a currency that you can then exchange for getting your basic needs met. So when you have a program that can create without the same requirements of compensation, because it doesn't need to subsist in the world in the same way, it can really, really, really make it hard to survive as an artist when you're comparing yourself or competing in the market with something that doesn't need to make money individually, versus an artist, where every piece that an artist makes, you should compensate them for that piece, for the art, for the time it takes, for the resources that they have to accumulate or have at hand, or the amount of skills that they have to acquire and develop over time. All of that in our, again, capitalistic world requires a financial exchange. Whereas when you're using AI, most of the time, the only financial exchange you might have to make is to essentially, like, almost a subscription to the company that is hosting the program. And that is a very big difference in financial burden for the consumer versus for the creator. And that can lead to some very dangerous precedents for artists who are already in our social landscape, often not compensated well enough for the creations that they make that are consumed worldwide, or even on an individual level, because in, especially, I would argue, capitalistic societies, isn't necessarily the same level of respect when it comes to artists and those who spend their time making art than towards, say, somebody who has what is seen as a legitimate job, which would generally kind of qualify for more product-based creation, or in fields that are more, I guess you could say, traditionally accepted as important. So if you work for a company, or if you are a trade worker, or if you work in a goods and services type of environment. Now, art is still a good, and it is also a service at the same time, but it isn't always seen to the same level of respectability as some of the other fields that are available. But we still need art all the time. We need it to make the media that we watch. We need it to make the clothes that we wear. We need it to make the music that we listen to, the books that we read, the photos that we see, and the paintings or the sculptures or the buildings that we use on a daily basis. All of that would be very much, it would be a different world if we didn't have artists to affect the landscape of our existence. And also, art is a great way to explore deeper psychological aspects of human nature and question even, authority, or to question cultural norms, or even just reflecting cultural norms. There's so many things that would be so very dull without art and dedicated artists who spend their lives creating. But again, still not fully, I think, appreciated, and not often compensated to the same degree as, say, a CEO or a top-level engineer, or a mathematician. You probably are more likely to find social support for compensating workers in fields that are seen as more scientific or mathematical at a higher rate than you would find an artist being compensated for work that might take the same amount of time or more time. And I wanted to explore how gender can also play a role in that, and of course, race. And there are so many fields that would not exist if there were not, a healthy amount of involvement from all cultures and across the world when it comes to artistic expression, that we don't always realize, I think, on a day-to-day, or we can take for granted as a society. How many times am I going to say as a society in this conversation tonight? If you are somebody who maybe didn't is newer to this conversation or is curious but hasn't necessarily had many conversations about gender differences, rigidity in gender expectations, or haven't really had the space or time to go on deep dives across the internet or through published medias into these topics, that's kind of one reason I'm here, is so that we can kind of have these conversations and questions can be asked if you are curious. I sincerely believe that there are no stupid questions, maybe just ones that are not fully informed yet. And the more informed you are, the more exciting the opportunity for learning can become. I also feel like being able to dive deeper into some of the historical contexts for where we get our assumptions of tradition from and what we assume to be tradition versus what maybe has become seen as tradition through the repetition of certain, I guess you could even say, bombastic talking points across social media, has really, I definitely think it can help inform how you move through the world as a person. And I think it's also helpful to be able to learn these things. So I was very curious when I was looking into some of the background data when it comes to like how boys are socialized, to see the comparison to how girls are socialized. It was, on a personal level, a huge revelation at various points in my life to realize what was conditioning and what was natural. And I think it's important to those moments of clarity as you move through the life and through the world, so that as you interact with others, you can keep those types of things in mind and maybe operate with a little bit more nuance when interacting with other people, and also in evaluating yourself. So today we're going to look at some of the gendered expectations that are pretty common, femme-presenting people and with cisgendered women, especially within the United States, but generally within a Western sphere of cultural norms. One of the articles I actually found, which I thought was super fascinating, was about how essentially some of the differences between how upbringing and educational norms really affect different genders and are reinforced by the ways that teachers and parents and in groups all interact with different genders. So because we often assume a binary of genders, which would mean either feminine gender or masculine gender. There is unfortunately not as much research when it comes to non-binary, and I think as well trans identities in a lot of these studies, especially when they're focused on very young populations of children and people. And a lot of that also does have to do with the kind of pervasive cultural norms of expecting that gender is going to fall into a binary, and then from there you're supposed to just either react to that binary or fall into the binary. So I am hopeful that in the future we'll have more scientific studies that include non-binary focuses when it comes to gender, but for now we do kind of have binary focused gendered norms as the main area of study for a lot of social scientists and also scientists looking into psychological phenomena and areas like this, like gendered norms. So there's this one article that was published in 2020, and it was published in the Frontiers institution, and it was published by Karina Mata and Satu Usiauti. And it was actually published by two researchers from the University of Lapland in Finland. So in this particular article, it kind of explores these 9 contradictory observations about girls' and boys' upbringing and education. Now, one thing that I think is really interesting when it comes to what this particularly explores is how over time there are a lot of repeated factors that show up throughout the years when it comes to socialization for girls and for boys, or for femme-presenting children and masc-presenting children. So what I really like about this is that it does kind of explore and show how with girls, there are really important differences that happen in development and in expression, which I think could maybe correlate to artistic expression over time. Self-esteem has a huge amount to do with artistic expression. With femme socialized children or girls, there is definitely a big shift in presentation of self-esteem based on age. So maybe as a child, probably a little bit more comfortable being forthright or exploring artistic ideas. But by adolescence, it can get a little bit more difficult as children get to an age where they start questioning what their authority figures maybe have taught them about how the world works, or what right and wrong are. And with the prevalence of social media has shifted how many adolescents and children interact with concepts around art, and also concepts around self-esteem and what is upheld as the good and what's upheld as the bad, as well as how you can question authority figures or norms, because social media has kind of allowed a lot of people to explore and see things far beyond what would be the expectation in perhaps their home spaces, but it can also create different bubbles. So what's fascinating is how there's expectations when it comes to what is like gendered expectations. When with girls, they're supposed to be altruistic, sensitive, and to also perform well. They're also supposed to be attentive and quieter, and to be more pleasing to authority figures. And also that kind of goes hand in hand with this expectation that they're not going to be as what is seen as aggressive or assertive even in how they interact with authority figures or like social structures or pressures, due to social pressures that have already been internalized by around the age of 4 for how a girl or a boy is allowed to express themselves. There's also an assumption of what boys are supposed to do and how boys are supposed to respond that is actually quite different, and girls do start to notice and boys start to notice at quite young ages. So in the live stream I did with the Boys Don't Cry video, there is definitely a specific age. It's about 4 to about 6 is when most children do start to internalize and respond to what they see modeled as the expectations for their gender. So if boys see themselves being rewarded, or at the very least encouraged or modeled through their authority figures, how to act, how to dress, how to speak, like which interests are expected of them based on their gender, they're going to start showing that and responding and replicating those modeled examples by around the age of 4, and for sure by the age of 10. And girls are going to do the same thing. The types of toys that girls are given are different. The types of play that they're expected to engage in is different. There's a lot of differences in what is expected with this particular highlighted line. Girls and boys register clues from various directions, from their homes, daycare, schools, youth culture, social media, marketing, information societies, entertainment industries, advertising, and culturally adopted behavior models, and that molds their behaviors. One thing that I think is really important with this is this line here. Girls and boys are often brought up differently, and that difference can be unconscious or involuntary on behalf of their authority figures. An authority figure could be a parent, it can be a teacher, it can be any family member or adult, or even older sibling, or any human in their sphere who has some kind of authority into shaping what that kid may think about how the world is supposed to work and how they're supposed to react and work in it. All of that heavily influences how somebody expresses themselves on an artistic level. There isn't, I guess from what I can think of, I don't think that there's this massive difference in representation of genders of who makes what kind of art, but more that there may be a higher likelihood that when you have like these more rigid gendered expectations structure how a society works, then you are probably going to have a very different reaction based on gender to what people are focusing on when they're exploring their ability to make art and react to their experiences, react to the world, react to politics, react to social norms, react to what is seen as good or bad. For example, there was multiple artistic movements throughout the ages which have challenged that when it comes to male artists. And then on the other hand, you have women and femme artists who've challenged the social expectations of maintaining gender dynamics in regards to being a woman or a femme, especially having to desire, say, motherhood or being married in a heterosexual relationship and monogamy. And you see this show up again and again and again in artistic expression and even in who is allowed to be seen as an artist. So I have another article I kind of wanted to show you. This is a article that was put together by the California Learning Resource Network, and this was only published in July of 2025, so relatively recently. And what I really like about this is it kind of explores how important gender dynamics are and also how cultural norms affect artistic expression and artistic creation in our world. There's so much of what we view as art and what we explore on an artistic way is shaped by the politics of the time that we're living in, by the financial access that artists have to create and to explore, by the social mores that are often heavily dedicated by religious thought, and what even qualifies as challenging social authority based on the time period that you grow up in and you live in. Like, for example, Michelangelo with the Sistine Chapel, there's all these things that he did that are basically Easter eggs if you were in the know and knew the tea at the time, that are very much like massive pushbacks against the components of how the Catholic Church operated at the time and the relationships that were integral to the functioning of the church's governing body in Michelangelo's world, which is super fascinating. But there were methods of challenging authority that he was able to integrate into art that has existed on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel for generations. And then you have artists like Basquiat, who used artistic styles that were seen as definitely not like socially accepted in the high art world until a wealthy patron decided that they liked Basquiat's art. So I think that's super fascinating, is how much the social norms of the time and also the political climate and who actually has access to money heavily influences how art is made. Because if, for example, again with Michelangelo, if the church wasn't willing to pay for him to make his art, or at the very least, he wouldn't have been able to create a piece of art that has lasted for so long and invented so many of the painting techniques and the kind of chemical explorations that he did to make that work or make that happen. He needed a patron who was wealthy enough to allow him the space and the time to do that. And the same can be said of Basquiat as well, is that his art would probably have been lost to time, other than the people who are able to experience it firsthand, if there wasn't a class of wealthy individuals who were willing to pay for the privilege of having his work. And there also may be things that he wouldn't have been able to explore as an artist without that financial support. And that's a very much a repeated case throughout history. And even the kinds of art that is seen as art is super reactive to like the social norms of the time that the art is being made. There's a higher amount of people who have economic strength because they have money. There's a higher amount of people who are able to have the type of capital it takes to actually support an artist and their creation, then an artist can actually explore at a greater level because they're not trying to compete all the time with just basic needs of survival. That's, I think, one reason that a lot of people get so frustrated about Nepo babies in the entertainment industry, is because the amount of work and some of the like dynamics that it takes to attain the heights to get there requires somebody else opening the door for you. And that door is so heavily closed and guarded and locked against people who don't have the wealth and don't have the social mobility or the social support to make that happen for them. So it can get really frustrating to watch somebody who has that door open for you to be able to like just walk in and attain essentially the ability to make art without having to also sacrifice in order to get your basic needs met, which also affects the kind of art that you're going to make. Because if you're somebody who comes from a less wealthy environment, there are maybe other dynamics at play as well. Of course, like race, class, socioeconomic status, all of that radically affects the type of experiences that you have in life, which also affects the type of art that you're going to make. Whereas if you're from a wealthier class and you have more space and time to explore artistically, you probably are going to have a bit of a different take into the type of art that you make, because your perception in regards to what you're speaking to as an artist might be different. There could be absolutely overlapping similarities no matter who the artist is or where the artist comes from or the kind of experiences the artist has had. But there's a higher likelihood that if you come from a space where you have had to navigate different levels of difficulty because of your race, your class, and your access to resources, you're going to have a very different understanding of the greater picture of why you've had to struggle and your response to that struggle and the way that it maybe has affected the people you know and your family and your life, and even your own understanding of gender and presentation and expression than somebody who hasn't had to experience those same kinds of struggles. Also, technology is a huge, 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 huge component that affects who gets to see art that is being made, and also who and how that art is popularized. So now that we have social media, there's been an interesting shift in the dynamic of who gets to express themselves artistically and how. So now, if you are capable of transferring your art from a physical space to a computerized one, then you're more likely to have the opportunity to have other people see your art and choose to invest in you as an artist with their time or their financial resources. On another hand, you also have certain kinds of art being made in response to major political climates, major political changes. I've seen so many comments on social media, on the internet recently, because of like, oh man, the music is really, really good. That means we're in a difficult political climate. And there's this kind of almost uniting component when it comes to creating art that is a response to unpopular political decisions that can affect a mass amount of people, that really, really affects who and how art is made, but also can be very unifying because there is a specific singular presence that is being responded to on an artistic level by artists from maybe multiple levels of societal access. So like if you're the wealthiest artist or you're the least wealthy artist, if you all have the same understanding of, say, a particular political action or historical experience that's happening, like war, there can be a kind of unifying response to that political or historical action or experience. Their personal experiences and then the experiences of their understandings of society at large, and reflect that on an artistic level. And sometimes, even if it's not conscious, you can still reflect greater societal truths on an unconscious level in one's art. So again, if we're kind of looking at how gender binaries, gender norms can affect individuals, or can affect societal structures and societal standards and vice versa, and then how that can affect the culture that a person grows up in, which can affect the type of art that they make. This all works together so intensely, and you kind of can't separate those conversations because of the fact that you need to understand, if you're going to be taking this vast look at what shapes art and artistic expression, then you do kind of need to look at these uniting factors, and also the factors that separate the kind of art that gets made based on financial access, based on social idealization, which can be very much more positive or less positive depending on your race or the community you belong to, or your gender presentation, or your orientation, or your choice of intimate partners or friendships. I mean, everything can be very much a influencing factor in the type of art you make. And then who is going to get the patronage that will allow you as an artist to grow and explore and even invent new kinds of artistic techniques or try new things. If you don't have the financial support to do that, that can make it very hard to see a massive shift on a grand societal level in regards to artistic expression. Especially if, say, the wealthy class is going to be consistently patronizing a very specific group of people who maybe the type of art they make doesn't challenge them in the same way as, say, a group that challenges the concept of capitalism or the concept of patronage in the first place, or the concept of the political movements that might be seen as controversial. So, for example, I went to an art show today, which was a gathering of I don't even know how many artists. It was huge. It was in an old 99-cent store. After 99-cent store had been closed down, this place had been kept, and a bunch of artists kind of took it over and displayed their art in very non-traditional ways. And it was in a way, a bit of a protest to the Frieze art fair that's going on in Los Angeles right now, which is kind of seen as this space for people to interact with art that's more socially acceptable for wealthier people, because it's a place where artists can, if you get invited to show your art at the Frieze fair, there's a higher likelihood that people with a lot of money who will be going through the Frieze fair will be willing to pay for the art that you make. And the assumption being that the art that is being made there is probably not going to challenge those wealthy people. Whereas this was an anti-Frieze art fair where all of the kind of stereotypical structures and accoutrement of how an art show works or how it's structured were just thrown out the window. Like things were just kind of piled everywhere. It was kind of hard to know which thing was art and what was there, but it was everywhere. It was really fascinating. And it was also kind of revamping a space that is traditionally geared towards the less financially wealthy groups of people, because how many billionaires are shopping or millionaires are shopping at the 99-cent store? And it was very much, there was a political statement in it. There was also a fundraiser, an anti-ICE fundraiser that was part of it. And when people bought artwork there, it was helping support a political reaction or a social reaction to a political movement that's enforced onto population, not necessarily with our consent. And so it's, again, another opportunity through the use of the show in the way that it was structured and the kind of art that was at the show to respond to greater social norms and expectations and even kind of dogmas that can make making art very difficult. It was also kind of an anti-AI art space where it allowed artists to create art that isn't perfect. Because that is one of the things about AI art, is that maybe it's technically proficient, but it's not, it removes the human error that can lead to innovation in art and innovation in general. When you have like major wars, major social shifts, major political movements, they can radically change the kind of art that is made in the spaces affected by those movements. And a lot of times, especially because art is a great way to respond to dogmatic or authoritarian regulations, people often tend to use abstract methods of response in order to avoid getting persecuted by the rigid expectations that are being used to police what is seen as acceptable or not acceptable. This article does also kind of explore how and question how one can use this new technology of digital tools to either enhance an artist's natural process or how it can be used to overtake an artist's ability to survive in the type of world that we live in now. So I think that to some degree, there's, again, so much that should definitely be explored when it comes to this concept. Do you think I still only just barely scratched the surface? But in general, I think that when it comes to exploring how gender dynamics affect artistic expression, which is shaped by the culture that we live in, it's really important to recognize that even the ways that we respond on an artistic level can be super gendered. The types of art that a person can make can be highly influenced by the gender that they were raised as, and where they fall when they're making art. If their gender expression had no longer representative of how they were raised, for example, if somebody is seen to fall within a gender binary when they're a child, is raised within that expectation when they are a child, and then maybe through their early adult years, and then they start questioning, they start exploring, and their exploration of gender can radically change their lives based on how strict the authoritative figures they have in their lives are when it comes to fitting a gendered expectation of like masc or femme or male or female, and what you're supposed to do at what age and what type of financial space you're supposed to be in and who's allowed to be an artist and the types of experiences that you might have based on gender. So that can really affect the kind of art that you make and affect the type of perspective you have as a artist, and also affect the type of person who might react to the art that that artist is making. So it's this really interesting interplay of multiple different dynamics, all kind of dancing together or reacting to one another at once. And I think that it's so important and so necessary for us as a society, as a populace, to be able to recognize all of the players that are involved in that dance. The ones who are creating the space for it, the ones who are involved in the actual movement, and the ones who are responding to the expectation that this dance happens in the way that it does. There's, again, so many fantastic and exciting things to explore when it comes to how we as a populace respond on an artistic level and are shaped by the culture in which we grow up. And there's so many details that we can get into when it comes to that. I think that we might be able to do that in a future live stream, but also don't forget to let me know if there is a component of what I talked about in today's live that you would like to explore more in the future. I really know that at the end of the day, I can start the conversation, but it's definitely up to you to let me know where you would like it to continue, and if you would like to watch any of these other videos, because I did talk and reference the Boys Don't Cry video multiple times throughout this stream. So you can explore all my other videos on my channel. I stream twice a week on YouTube, and I sometimes multi-stream once a week on YouTube and Twitch or another platform like Instagram. So if you ever want to jump in, all you got to do is subscribe to request a topic to be covered during one of my live streams. Then you can easily do that just by joining my Discord and adding your request into the topics for stream thread on Discord, or you can let me know in the comments below this video. I think I did it. Thank you so much, everybody, for jumping in. We'll see you around.